Okay, so now that you might actually hear me on the recordings, let's try one today. We've talked a little bit about some of these trig identities so that we can actually calculate them, like how do we find the cosecant of an angle? Well, the cosecant, what function do we use? The sine. It's 1 divided by the sine of that same angle. To find the secant of an angle was, what trig function do we use? Cosine. So it's the reciprocal of the cosine of an angle. And cotangent was reciprocal of the tangent. Well, I want to focus a little bit on the tangent next. When we saw tangent as the sides of a triangle, what sides were used for tangent? Opposite over adjacent. Very good. Well, if we look at sine and cosine, what sides were used for sine? Opposite and hypotenuse. Cosine? Hypotenuse and adjacent. You'd be a jerk. It's okay. You probably learned it from me. Anyway.
I got it written down.
Sure. Okay. So we've got these two here. If we divided them out, let's say I had the sine of an angle divided by the cosine of an angle. Well, within that triangle, the sine, of course, is the opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. To divide those out, it would be opposite over hypotenuse. Now, when we divide fractions, we change it into not decimals, but multiplying by I know it's been a couple months, but when you're dividing fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So instead of adjacent over hypotenuse dividing by adjacent over hypotenuse, we're going to multiply by hypotenuse over adjacent. Well, what's going to happen in this multiplication here? Hypotenuse is going to cross cancel out. What's left? It's going to be opposite over adjacent. Does that look familiar? I'm going to keep circling it until somebody tells me what it is. Opposite over adjacent is what? That's a tangent. Huh. So a tangent of an angle can be found by taking the sine of that angle divided by the cosine of that angle. Let's test this and see. What is the tangent of 60 degrees? Let me know when you get to it. Did you get it? Tangent of 60 degrees is 1.732. Well, what is the sine of 60 degrees? Yeah. Sine of 60 is 0.866. Cosine is no. 0.5, right? Let's test this out. We just said tangent is sine divided by cosine. So if I take these here, what do I get if I take 0.866 divided by 0.5? Yes, we do. 1.732. Okay, so that one works out. How about cotangent? Cotangent, of course, is the reciprocal tangent, 1 divided by tangent. So would it make sense that cotangent is cosine over sine? Say yes. Oh, good answer. So we can find these other trig functions by these ratios. If I have, let's say that I have a trig function or an angle where I know that the sine of this angle is 0.6 and the cosine of this angle is 0.8. First of all, is there a way I can tell that this is valid? I mean, I can't just make up numbers. If it's the same angle, there has to be a relationship between the sine and the cosine, right? Is there a way I can tell that this is a valid relationship, that it's not, like, stupid? Well, if we look at our unit circle, let's say this is our angle right here. Here's the sine. Right here is the cosine. This is a right angle. This is a right triangle, right? Is there a relationship between the legs of a right triangle? Well, the angle is 90. The other two angles add to 90. But if I throw in this side here, the hypotenuse, is there a relationship between the three sides of a right triangle? This one might sound familiar to you. Does it? Do we know what this length is? Say yes.
Yeah.
It's always what? 1. It's a unit circle. 1 unit is radius. So we know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In this case, c is 1. What's 1 squared? 1. Very good. So a squared would be the sine. So the sine of the angle squared plus the cosine of the angle squared has to add up to 1. What's 0.6 plus 0.8? Or 0.6 squared plus 0.8 squared? Hey, it's 1. You didn't think I was going to screw that one up, did you? Okay. Now that we know this, though, now that we have those two angles, we can find, or those two trig functions here, we can find every other trig function there is for this. What's the tangent of theta have to be? Tangent of that angle. If we know the sine is 0.6 and the cosine is 0.8, sine divided by cosine comes out to be 0.75. Secant of that angle. 1 divided by cosine. 1 divided by 0.8. 1.25. Cosecant. Well, it's 1 divided by sine. 1 divided by 0.6 is 1.667, right? Oh, I see 1.67. Good enough. Cotangent. Cosine divided by sine, or 1.33. So if we know the sine and the cosine of an angle, we know everything else. In fact, if we just know one of the sine or the cosine, we know everything else. If I tell you that the sine of an angle is 0.3, how do I find the cosine? Well, a squared plus b squared equals c squared means 0.3 squared plus the cosine of that angle squared equals 1 squared, or just 1. So to solve this, it's going to be the square root of 1 minus 0.3 squared, 0.9539. If I wanted to solve this, I could go through the long process. Basically, I'm going to subtract 0.3 squared, right? So that gives me cosine of this angle squared equals 1 minus 0.3 squared. Then I take the square root. So it's the square root of that. So that's what I entered. The square root of 1 minus 0.3 squared gives me 0.9539. Questions? So now, how would I find the tangent? Yeah, sine divided by cosine. So 0.3 divided by 0.9539 is going to give us 0.3145. And I'm going to trust from there you can find the secant, cosecant, cotangent. All that good happy stuff, right? Well, what if we have the tangent of an angle is equal to 2.4? If we know that the tangent of an angle is 2.4, can I find all the other functions? Say no. The tangent involves both the sine and the cosine. So if we have the tangent, we need to know either the sine or the cosine. So let's say I tell you that the sine of this angle is, how to make that work? For the secant and stuff, remember secant is 1 over cosine, or cosine, x negative 1. We'll do that on this one for you. We'll make sure we get it done again. Cosecant and cotangent. Yeah, we'll do that on this example for you. So, okay, yeah, we'll go through that again. So if the tangent is 2.4 and the sine is 0.9231, how would we find the cosine? Well, the tangent is sine over cosine, right? So we're just going to do this. I'm going to put a 1 under this, and then we cross multiply and divide. 1 times the sine is the sine, right? Divided by the tangent. So I'm just going to put in the numbers. It's 2.4 over 1 equals 0.9231 over the cosine. So 1 times 0.9231 is 0.9231 divided by 2.4 gives it the cosine must be 0.3846. Of course, now that we have all those, the other three trig functions fall into place. Cotangent is cosine over sine, or we could just do, since we know the tangent, just 1 over the tangent, right? In this case, it's probably more accurate to do 1 over the tangent. So 1 divided by 2.4. 0.4167. Does that one make sense so far? So you do either one of those, cosine divided by sine or 1 divided by tangent. You look confused, Andrew. You got her down? Okay. For secant, remember the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine, so it's 1 over cosine. So in this case, it'd be 1 divided by 0.3846. Giving us 2.6001. There's our secant. Cosecant of an angle is 1 divided by the sine. It would be 1 divided by 0.9231, otherwise known as 1.0833. Does that make sense? So what if I give you this? What if I tell you that the secant of an angle equals 2? Can I find the other 5 trig functions? Yes. How? Don't know. Well, the secant is related directly to which other trig function? That sine. Secant goes with cosine. If the secant is 1 over the cosine, well, then the cosine is 1 over the secant. This way, secant is equal to 1 over cosine, right? So I put this over 1, it's 1 times 1 is 1 divided by the secant. So it's going to end up being 2 over 1 equals 1 over cosine. 1 times 1 is 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, right? So the cosine is 0.5. Can I find the sine now? Say yes. Once I have the cosine, how do I find the sine? Sine squared plus cosine squared, so the cosine is 0.5 here, has to equal 1. squared, or 1. Well, 0.5 squared is 0.25. So this is saying that the sine squared, if I subtract 0.25, is 0.75 now. And then I'm going to square root. So the square root of 0.75 is 0.66. Yeah. Can I find the tangent? Yeah, tangent is sine over cosine. 1.732. Cotangent? Cosine divided by sine. So 0.5 over 0.866, otherwise known as what, 0.577? Is that correct? Close enough. 0.5774 technically. How about cosecant? That's one we haven't done yet. What's 1 divided by sine? So 1 over 0.866 or 1.15. Not horrible? You just gotta have all the formulas. There you go. So what if I tell you that angle A plus angle B equals 90 degrees, and tell you that the sine of angle A equals 0.4. First question I'm going to ask. We're going to keep this information right here. What is the cosine of angle B? Just 0.4. A plus B adds up to 90 degrees. That means they're complements. The sine of one is equal to the cosine of the other. If I wanted the cosine of A, though, then I would have to do what? Yeah, that would be sine squared is 0.4 squared plus cosine of A squared equals 1 squared or 1. Now to solve this, it'd be 1 minus, or the square root of 1 minus 0.4 squared. So square root 1 minus 0.4 squared, 0.9165. Looking good so far? Now from there, once you have the sine and the, what would be the sine of angle B? Sine A and cosine, sine B and cosine A have to be the same. A lot of little rules to remember there, isn't there? Yes, there is. On page 730 and page 731. That was actually exercise 34-2, 1 through 31, the odds. Require you to use these identities to find 31, the odds.